This batch of excerpts from this U.S. Department of Treasury webpage on the debt limits, these PDFs reaching back to 2011, are the last batch. There have been 3 previous videos. One was the main introduction, and then 2 supplements, which were also excerpts. And this is the 3rd video with the excerpts, and the topics are parties, amounts involved, prioritization, asset sales, treasury bonds, and money. Without further ado, parties. Responsibility for creating the debt is bipartisan, and responsibility for meeting a nation's obligations must be shared by both parties. Commentary. The consequences fall back on the people, and the Congress is the people's Congress. Parties need to be put in their place, not entrenched in Congress. Secretaries of the Treasury in both Republican and Democratic administrations have used their authority to take certain extraordinary measures in order to prevent the United States from defaulting on its obligations as Congress deliberated on increasing the statutory debt limit. Commentary. Here is an example of why the left-wing versus right-wing paradigm does not match reality. Both of them are guilty of abusing the debt limit to fund their own particular authoritarian bent. In recent years, Congress has addressed the debt limit through regular order with broad bipartisan support. Commentary. This actually shows how worthless parties really are. They, through regular order and broad bipartisan support, engaged in plundering the full faith and credit of the USA. Protecting Americans' creditworthiness and our economic leadership position in the world is a duty to our country that is shared by policymakers in both parties, in the legislative branch as well as executive branch. Therefore, any attempt by either party to use the full faith and credit of the United States as a bargaining chip to advance partisan policy agendas would be irresponsible. Congress has always acted when called upon to raise the debt limit. Since 1960, Congress has acted 78 separate times to permanently raise, temporarily extend, or revise the definition of the debt limit. 49 times under Republican presidents and 29 times under Democratic presidents. Commentary. Well, I think we would all like to say that Congress is in control. However, this phrase, Congress has always acted when called upon, makes them sound like trained dogs. Commentary. I think most people would assume that the Democratic left wing would have raised the debt limit more than the Republican right wing to support their authoritarian goals, but that is not the case. The Republicans have engaged in the most abuse. Amounts involved. In February of 2010, Congress passed legislation to increase the debt limit to $14.29 trillion. On December 31, 2012, the outstanding debt subject to limit reached the statutory limit of $16.394 trillion, or $16,394 billion. The enactment of SJ Resolution 33, which will increase the debt limit by $2.5 trillion, December 15, 2021. In my letter of January 13, 2023, I noted the Public Law 117-73 increased the statutory debt limit to a level of $31.381 trillion. That was a little over a year ago. The United States is now required to borrow approximately 40 cents for every dollar of expenditures. Your proposal would require cutting roughly 40% of all government payments. Earlier this year, Treasury implemented a new policy of maintaining a cash balance generally sufficient to cover 1 week of overflows, subject to a minimum of roughly $150 billion. In a public release, we explained that the policy would help protect against a potential interruption in market access resulting from events such as Hurricane Sandy, September 11th, or a potential cyber attack. Maintaining this higher cash balance does not increase the debt limit, nor does it alter in any way the length of time Treasury can continue to pay the nation's bills. On August 19th, our cash balance fell below this minimum level. Commentary: 1 week's worth of cash on hand sounds like a minimum wage worker. I noted that Treasury cash balances already had fallen below 150 billion. Maintaining this minimum prudent balance helps protect against potential market interruptions, but it does not increase the debt limit or alter the time we can continue to pay the nation's bills. Commentary: minimum prudent balance. That sounds like me justifying why I only have $20 on Monday morning after getting paid last Friday. Commentary: with off-the-books projects, rounding errors, missing funds like the $1 trillion announced as missing on 9/10/2001, the day before 9/11, in comparison to running up with 150 billion of the debt limit, how can the U.S. know for certain what the true account books looks like? If the government cannot govern the accounts, it is a dubious proposition to let them govern people's lives. Keep the accounts straight, then we will let you govern people's lives. Secondly, your suggestion that the government operate for some indefinite period within a 2.6 trillion debt ceiling budget is unworkable. The United States is now required to borrow roughly 40 cents of every dollar of expenditures. Therefore, your proposal would require cutting approximately 40% of all government payments. Commentary: geez, a cutback of government payments. What a novel idea. And the thing that they're not stating there that's hidden is if they cut back spending on 40 cents for every dollar, then their budget would be balanced. Now another way that they could do that is raise taxes by 40%. So if you're paying 30% now and they raise taxes by 40%, everyone would be paying 70%, and you would hardly have enough money to spend on what you wanted, because the majority would be going towards the government. And then people would scream socialism and communism, and something might get done. Now, the fact that that's hidden from people is very, very dangerous, because that means the consequences, the power is still there. It's just not being made demonstrable in your lives yet. Prioritization. The House of Representatives recently passed legislation that includes all ill-advised provision to prioritize payments, which would not protect the full faith and credit of the United States. Any plan to prioritize some payments over others is simply default by another name. The United States should never have to choose, for example, whether to pay Social Security to seniors, pay benefits to our veterans, or make payments to state and local jurisdictions and health care providers under Medicare and Medicaid. There is no way of knowing the damage any prioritization plan would have on our economy and financial markets. It would represent an irresponsible retreat from a core American value. We are a nation that honors all of our commitments. September 25th, 2013. Commentary: the U.S. honors its commitments, except, apparently, the debt limit commitment. Commentary: interesting. The letter lists all the items that have wide emotional attachment in society, but does not list a huge number of additional entities that bestow power to the government. I want to reiterate the administration's view expressed in a Statement of Administration position on May 7, 2013, regarding the so-called Prioritization Plan passed by the House of Representatives last week. This legislation is unwise, unworkable, unacceptably risky, and will harm the full faith and credit of the nation. The President has indicated he would veto the legislation if it were to reach his desk. Wow, that is some harsh language. Prioritization also fails to account for how payments of principal would be made if investors were to lose confidence in U.S. creditworthiness. In August of this year, for example, more than $500 billion in U.S. Treasury debt will mature. Under normal circumstances, investors who hold securities purchase new Treasury securities when the debt matures, permitting the United States to pay the principal on that maturing debt. Yet, in the scenario you advocate, in which the United States would be defaulting on a broad range of its other obligations, there is no guarantee that investors would continue to reinvest the new Treasury securities. In fact, some market participants had already indicated they would be disinclined to do so. As one of the major rating service agencies concluded in a recent report, failure to pay non-debt obligations would signal severe financial distress and potentially imminent debt default, prompting the U.S. sovereign ratings to be placed on rating watch negative. The idea of prioritization has been rejected by every president and secretary of the Treasury who have considered it. It is unwise, unworkable, unacceptably risky, and unfair to the American people. So, what is wise, workable, acceptably risky, and fair? Is it to, wait for it, raise the debt limit whenever we want? Yay! Commentary. There is certain deficiency in using English and maybe any everyday use of language to say raise when referring to a negative number like the debt limit. To raise has a positive connotation to it, and mindless idiots listening first subscribe to that aspect before being critical of the negative aspect of the debt limit being broke through. To raise the debt limit, as in to raise a negative number. Asset sales. Although the U.S. government owns other assets, such as gold, there are prudential or legal limitations on its ability to sell these assets. Selling the nation's gold to meet payment obligations would undercut confidence in the United States, both here and abroad, and would be extremely destabilizing in the world financial system. With respect to financial assets acquired as part of the response to the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, Treasury has already sold most of these assets and is conducting an orderly wind down of the remaining investments. A fire sale of these assets, however, would be disruptive and would harm taxpayer interests. Similar considerations argue against fire sales in other public assets, and in any event, asset sales would not generate sufficient revenue to make an appreciable difference in when the debt limit must be raised. Finally, for both legal and practical reasons, sale of the government's portfolio of student loans is not feasible. For these reasons, Secretaries of the Treasury of both parties have concluded that asset sales are not a prudent or viable alternative to increasing the debt limit. Commentary. Borrowing on the full faith and credit of the USA and using that as collateral is at the least putting our future into hock. Might not be a full-blown asset sale, but it dang sure is not keeping our collateral, full faith and credit, in responsible order. Commentary. There is a certain disingenuous in claiming to care about taxpayer interests under the presumption that it is taxpayers' contributions that pay for things, then at the same time request for the debt limit be increased so more debt can be obtained so the government can pay for things. I would venture to say that taxpayers are not even needed anymore, and the whole process of paying taxes is just a Pavlovian method to extract obeisance to the state. And let that sink in a little bit, because taxpayers are citizens. And if taxpayers aren't needed anymore, then that means citizens are not needed anymore, and everything that connotates. A fire sale of financial assets would be damaging to the economy, taxpayers, and financial markets. It would harm the interests of taxpayers and would undermine confidence in the United States. Nor would such sales postpone reaching the debt limit for a meaningful amount of time. Congress would still need to raise the debt limit. A fire sale of the nation's gold to meet payment obligations would undercut confidence in the United States, both here and abroad, and would be extremely destabilizing to the world financial system. Commentary. Keep in mind the full faith and credit is backed by the collateral of the USA, the territory and its boundaries, its things, its people, its military power, and bankruptcy sales are like fire sales. The infeasibility of asset sales can be illustrated by an analogy. A family that is struggling to make its monthly mortgage payment would try to sell all of its possessions within a week at a garage sale or on the internet. But of course the family would receive much less than the value of its possessions, and once the next month came, the family would still need to make its mortgage payments, yet all of its possessions would be gone. Commentary. The moral of that story is to not get overextended financially in the first place. Commentary. Ad lib. Audible. Just stop and think for a second. This is the United States. American exceptionalism. Pax Americana. The great USA, the Treasury Secretary, writing to Congress and using an analogy of a garage sale or an internet sale. Where have the adults gone? What is going on? Treasury bonds and money. If investors should become unwilling to loan the United States money, the United States would face an immediate cash shortfall. Indeed, such a scenario could undermine financial markets and result in significant disruptions to our economy. Commentary. Okay, what are the investors going to loan the United States? Federal Reserve notes? Those Federal Reserve notes are defined as obligations in the U.S. Code. So the Treasury is going to give a Treasury bond to the Federal Reserve for some Federal Reserve notes. Then the U.S. government is going to spend those Federal Reserve notes. Then an investor will acquire those Federal Reserve notes and then loan them to the Treasury to acquire their own Treasury bond. So there are two Treasury bonds out there for the same Federal Reserve notes. This amounts to an incestuous relationship that Aristotle noted back in politics over 2,000 years ago, and is called monetarizing the debt. But that is a topic for another time. Lowering the debt limit would lessen our exposure to this criminal practice that is facilitated by the Federal Reserve. But it is not their fault. As a result, investors in the United States and around the world will be less likely to lend us money in the future, and those investors who still choose to purchase Treasury securities would demand much higher interest rates, reflecting the increased risk that we might default on our obligations again. Commentary. Who buys the most Treasury bonds, investors or the Federal Reserve? If another country buys U.S. Treasury bonds with Federal Reserve notes, is there any difference between that and the Federal Reserve using their own Federal Reserve notes? The unique role of Treasury securities in the global financial system means the consequences of default would be particularly severe. Treasury securities are a key holding on the balance sheets of virtually every major insurance company, bank, money market fund, and pension fund in the world. They are also widely used as collateral by financial institutions to meet their day-to-day cash flow needs in the short-term financing market. A default on Treasury debt could lead to concerns about the solvency of the investment funds and financial institutions that hold Treasury securities in their portfolios, which could cause a run on the money market mutual funds and the broader financial systems. Similar to what occurred in the wake of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, as the recent financial crisis demonstrated, a severe and sudden blow to confidence in the financial markets can spark a panic that threatens the health of our entire global economy and the jobs of millions of Americans. Commentary. The potential for hating the USA is enormous.